Hey guys. All right, so we are finishing up our unit on culture, the Mexican culture. We've learned a lot. We've learned about Frida Kahlo. We've learned about the different religions and how they practice their religion, right? Well, today I am going to teach you about the Aztecs, and I'm going to teach you about um, one of their main documents that we have used to learn about them, and this is called the Florentine Codex. Um, it's a really important document, and we're going to learn about where it came from and what it teaches us and why it's important, all right? All right, so first off, I don't think we've ever talked about what a codex is. So a codex is defined as a handwritten manuscript. This means that it's a really old book, essentially. A manuscript means that it's the original body of work. So it's the very first time that it was ever written. So like when J.K. Rowling wrote Harry Potter, right? She wrote it herself first. So the manuscript is the original copy. All the other books that we read are just copies of her manuscript. So a codex has to be a manuscript. Codexes, which mean so a singular is called a codex. Codices is what we call is how we would say it multiple. So codices are also categorized as being bound in book format using paper or similar substances. So they really are the original book. Before it was in book form, it was in scroll form. And the Mesoamerican codices were not usually in book format though. The one that you can see in this picture, this is called the Codex Gigas, the Devil's Bible. So again, we're talking about the Florentine Codex, right? What is it? Well, Florentine. What does that sound like? Florence, right? And we're talking about Mexico. Florence is in Italy. So it is a little confusing, but we're going to get there. The Florentine Codex is an original manuscript about the ancient Aztec people and their society. In English, the title translates to The General History of Things of New Spain. So if you remember, New Spain is what we call Mexico. Back when it was first found, they called it New Spain. But the Aztecs called it home, right? The Florentine Codex is more than a history book. The Codex is considered the first anthropology book. It teaches us about their culture. It teaches us about the people, not just the events that happen. It's incredibly detailed and consists of 12 different books within the one book, with topics ranging from the gods, philosophy, animals, rocks, and astrology, all parts of culture. The final and 12th book is a history of the conquest. So history is included, which history is a big part of culture, right? So who wrote this book? This book was written by Fray Bernardino de Sahaguan. And the reason that this is important is because this helps us understand why it's called the Florentine Codex, kind of. So Sahagun, I said Sahaguan, but it's Sahagun. I'm sorry, guys. He was originally born in Spain as Bernardino de Rivera, but he changed his name when he became a friar, which means that he was a religious guy. And that was normal. He moved to New Spain some point in his life, so he crossed the Atlantic Ocean. He left Spain and he moved to what we now call Mexico, and he ended up learning Nahuatl. That's how you pronounce that word. And he helped establish the Colegio Imperial de Santo Cruz de Tlaxcala in Mexico City in 1536. It was a college, basically. And that is where he translated both Aztec and Spanish documents into to Spanish. Well, he translated Aztec into Spanish. He is known as the father of anthropology, essentially. He was the first person to really learn about a culture, and Sahagun was a good man, actually. Well, as good as you can be at that time. And he's what we call the father of anthropology because he didn't, from what we can tell, he didn't try to change the people, the Aztecs. Well, he did. But he just tried to record them. He tried to record about them. When was this book written? So the Historia General, which is what the Florentine Codex was called, if you remember, was worked on from 1545 up until Sahagun's death in 1590. It was nearly a 50-year project. He spent most of his life observing and paying attention to the Aztec people. Obviously, the conquest to take over the Aztecs' lands ended in 1525, and no part of this particular codex is believed to be pre-conquest, but it is believed to be worked on by actual native peoples, which is really important because none of the other codices besides one and maybe two are pre-conquest. So it's not as close as we would like it, but it's still pretty close and it's still fresh, especially because native Aztecs worked on it and helped contribute. Where was it written? So this is where the Florentine parts comes in. So the manuscript was created in New Spain. He wrote it there, but it was found in a library somehow in Florence in 1793, almost 200 years later. This is why it's titled the Florentine Codex. So in some random place across the water, this thing about the Aztecs was found. Two other smaller versions were also found in two different archives in Spain. Scholars do not know how it got from Mexico to Italy. Why? Why was this written? The Florentine Codex has become one of the leading sources on ancient Aztec customs and society, not because of its pre-conquest nature, but because of its unique origins and context. The images and the original Nahuatl text are invaluable contributions to Mexican and world history. Again, this is important because the way that this thing is set up is you can see the Nahuatl and the Spanish written right next to each other in his original handwriting. Remember, it's a codex, it's the original manuscript. So when you look at the original version, you see an ancient language that we don't have today anymore. And it helps us really learn a lot because you can learn a lot from a language, and having the Nahuatl and their words and their phrases and the way they spoke teaches us a lot about their society and their people. The English translation, so that we can understand it today, was another huge project, and it took 30 years for Charles E. Dibble and Arthur J. Anderson to translate it. And actually, one of these authors was from the University of Utah, here in Utah. So that's cool. But they spent a long time working on this because it's a very, very difficult thing to translate correctly. The words are so different. So much has changed. The meanings behind a lot of it. So it takes a lot of research and a lot of counter-referencing, and you have to understand a lot of Spanish and the history of Spanish, and you have to know Nahuatl, and which is still a language today. So we're very incredibly lucky to have that English translation. And we are going to be looking at this in class next time. So I want you to be ready for that, and go ahead and do that little quiz at the bottom. Thanks, guys.